And they say, it's the best one we've ever seen. That did not happen.
What about this intro made this TED Talk the most watched ever on YouTube? Your intro is the most crucial real estate to capture your audience's attention. So how should you craft your next intro?
So in college, I was a government major, which means I had to write a lot of papers. Now, when a normal student writes a paper, they might spread the work out a little like this. So, you get started maybe a little slowly, but you get enough done in the first week that with some heavier days later on, everything gets done and things stay civil. And I would want to do that like that. That would be the plan. I would have it all ready to go, but then actually the paper would come along, and then I would kind of do this.
Now, every great speech does one thing in common in their intro. They pique their audience's attention. Attention is never given, it's only earned. So how does he capture their attention? He creates contrast in his narrative. Notice how he talks about what a normal kid's experience would look like preparing to write a paper and what his experience looks like. You can use antonyms like normal versus abnormal or heavy versus light. Anytime you use contrast, your audience will notice when there are stark deviations from the norm, and that will draw them in even more.
And that would happen every single paper. But then came my 90-page senior thesis, a paper you're supposed to spend a year on. I knew for a paper like that, my normal workflow was not an option. It was way too big a project. So I planned things out, and I decided it kind of had to go something like this. This is how the year would go. So I'd start off light, and I'd bump it up in the middle months. And then at the end, I would kick it up into high gear. It's just like a little staircase. How hard could it be? Just walk up the stairs. No big deal, right? But then, funniest thing happened. Those first few months, they came and went, and I couldn't quite do stuff. So we had an awesome new revised plan. But then those middle months actually went by, and I didn't really write words. And so we were here. And then 2 months turned into 1 month, which turned into 2 weeks. And one day I woke up with 3 days until the deadline, still not having written a word. And so I did the only thing I could.
Another thing that Tim does beautifully is he creates gaps in his story and uses visual cues to fill them. Let me show you why this is so important through an example. Compare these two statements. 2 plus 2 equals 4. What's 2 plus 2? Notice on the first statement, you're probably like, yeah, so what? The second, though, you immediately responded with 4, and you were more engaged. We as humans are hardwired to want to problem solve, to want to interpret, and what we don't like is to be told what to do, especially in a speech. So when you can create questions that your audience will be curious about, or when you're not necessarily telling people what your work ethic is like, but rather creating the gap and using a visual to show them, that's the stuff that actually gets your audience to laugh, to cry, to feel whatever it is that you're trying to convey in your next speech.
I wrote 90 pages over 72 hours, pulling not 1 but 2 all-nighters. Humans are not supposed to pull 2 all-nighters. Sprinted across campus, dove in slow motion, and got it in just at the deadline. I thought that was the end of everything. But a week later, I get a call. And it's the school. And they say, is this Tim Urban? And I say, yeah. And they say, we need to talk about your thesis. I say, okay.
The next thing he does is he does a great job at walking you through his story. Notice how he uses present tense to reenact the conversation with his school. When you can walk your audience through the feelings, the thoughts, the dialogue, the detail, as though you're reliving the experience yourself, that's when you've hooked your audience, because now they're transported into a completely unique experience. They probably are able to relate to it, which is why they're even more intrigued, but your story is unique. Only to you. And I promise you that if you tell your story, everyone will naturally gravitate towards it, especially when there's a hook to it. In this case, we're wondering, how the heck is this train wreck going to resolve itself? Is he going to even deliver a paper that's worth reading? Does the procrastination method actually work just as well? This creates internal conflict in your audience's mind that they have to resolve. They need to know, how is this story going to play out? Now, the best storytellers do a great job at striking a balance between building tension in your audience's mind, creating that conflict, and then resolving it just at the right time before they lose interest.
And they say, we need to talk about your thesis. I say, okay. And they say, it's the best one we've ever seen. That did not happen. It was a very, very bad thesis. I just wanted to enjoy that one moment when all of you thought, this guy is amazing. No, it was very, very bad.
Tim uses what's called the fake out method. He sets up the audience to have a certain expectation. This is likely to be a train wreck because how can you possibly write 90 pages in 72 hours? And then he flips at 180 on them, which evokes laughter. But what's really cool about what Tim Urban does is he uses the double fake out method. He sets up the expectation one way, making you think he did a great job on his thesis, but then he brings you back to reality, which is actually, no, it wasn't that great. When you can start off your presentation by building up tension and releasing it with a climax, when you can evoke an emotional or a physiological response, that's when you've earned your audience's attention to go into the meat of your presentation because you've now earned your audience's respect and trust. Conversely, if you just lead with your core idea without going into the story, without giving them a promise, without giving them a reason to care, your audience will immediately tune you out. Now, it can be really hard to memorize all these communication skills, so subscribe to my newsletter at PrestonChin.co, where you'll get weekly communication tips to elevate your impact at work.